en Mike krijgen allebei geen roos, hè? Wel.
Nee.
Je hebt wel heel veel.
Ja, die zijn voor de chatmensen.
Ja.
Maar ja, wat als die valt op een nummer dat ik hier.
Je kiest straks je eigen nummer, zeker, Quincy.
Ik zat ook op voetbal.
Gewoon voetbal, ik heb gewonnen. Ja.
Er liggen nog meer nummers in, Henk. Wat is dat?
Ja, die ga ik zo meteen uit grabbelen.
Allemaal één?
Oh, hier is die.
Hi Chris. Hi Chris, can you hear me?
Hi there.
Hi. How's the weather in Tasmania?
Yeah, good. Early.
Yeah, early. What time?
Very early. It's 10 to 3. Just about 10 to 3. In the morning, yeah. On a Thursday morning.
Wow.
S'nachts.
Yeah,
AM.
but it's good to see you.
Cheers.
Okay, let's start. Well, welcome everyone. Vincent will start our welcome.
Yes, thank you. Always a pleasure. I see so much people together for a meetup organized by Henk and Kenny. Welcome at Trivento. I'll give you a short introduction of Trivento. We're a software company for high-end consultancy and custom-made software and integration cases. We can offer our customers consultancy from customer journey. Already, that's something Simon does, until software architect until complete solutions running at the cloud platform, AWS, AWS, or our own platform, inclusive maintenance. As you all know, knowledge and experience is very important for companies like us. So we often facilitate this kind of meetups. As today, the Ionic Meetup organized as for today. I want to wish you all a very pleasant and interesting evening and I give the word to, I think, Henk.
Yeah,
Henk, so you can start with the meeting with the meetup.
thanks.
Yes.
Thanks. We have a very global audience tonight from Utah, from New York, from Sao Paulo, even from Ireland, and even from Tasmania. So that's rather awesome. After this event, the next event will be in May. There's also an online event of Ionic itself. It will be Ionic conference. And I'm very proud to tell you, I am also part of it. I will tell something about Ionic and AWS Amplify. This will be part of the cloud and in this part. So with 25 of May, I will tell something about Ionic and AWS Amplify. I have a small disappointment for you. I've got the socks, but you can still win those socks after the meetup. I will have a lottery and everyone can win. Someone can win a pair of Ionic socks, and also later on you will get some Ionic stickers. I will give the word to Mike. Mike, are you there? Oh wait, Mike.
Hello.
Hi. I was thinking about you for a present, And I was looking in your timeline of Twitter, and I saw you are very busy with woodwork. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And in Holland, we have a very famous Dutch designer. His name is Rietveld. So I will send you a book about Rietveld, how you can make real Dutch chairs or furniture.
Ooh, that sounds awesome. I
But,
need a set of new chairs, so that's
exactly.
perfect timing.
But later on, I want some proof. Okay.
All right.
Proof.
Okay, then it's to you.
Send the book in a tree.
Right, let's get my screen share going. All right, let me just get a confirmation that that's looking good.
Weer maar in the waiting room.
Kan je de camera ook hierop zetten of niet?
Ja.
Leuk.
Awesome. So that's coming in. That's coming across good. Perfect. All right.
Ja, dat is echt.
Oops.
Stress testing the equipment.
Yeah, you're back on the main screen, so luckily.
Back in here.
Yeah.
This is not a drill. This is not a drill.
Oh, people.
Awesome. So that's good.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. Well, thank you all for having me. This is super fun. I was slightly jealous when Liam got to present last time, so I feel very happy that I get to present this time around. We're going to be talking about building apps and making them fast as heck. Introduce your own flavor of how fast you would like them to be. Could be any other four-letter word, but we are going to talk about making Ionic apps fast as heck. I'm Mike Hartington. I work at Ionic. You can find me on Twitter if you would like. We're just going to try to jump into this. I want to start off by saying I do want to make sure that we can have nice things. Anything that we're going to be looking at today is not necessarily going to make or break your app. You could be building any kind of business type of app. What we're going to be looking at is how can we take what is a functional app and start adding some nice features on top of it in a performant way that really enhances the user experience. This is obviously something that is at a core to Ionic's mission, but also my own mission is to be able to build amazing stuff with the web. But it's pretty obvious that if you've tried this before, it's very difficult. You can get a pretty good functioning app, but as soon as you start to add like some animations or some nuanced interactions within that app, you're gonna find out that it's very easy to mess that interaction up, and it's very difficult to make it feel seamless, to make that experience very smooth. Users are trained by this point in time on what is a good user experience. They know that things should be fast at loading. It should be fast whenever they click a button or tap a button on a mobile device. They know that their app should never really slow down. And if your app does eventually slow down, it's not really something that they're going to let go. They're always going to remember that one time that your app decided to just fall short and either crash or just felt laggy. Now, we as developers have internalized this pretty easily with the good adage of, it doesn't feel native to me. Fun story, my very first mobile app long before I joined Ionic, was at a company where we were building information systems for scientific equipment. So I would make the overview, the pamphlets, the deep dive into the technical specs. And really, it's just a bunch of links, and I'm just showing collapsible accordions, essentially. And the approach, even back then, this was like 2012, was everything that we could do, we need to do it so that way our CEO didn't come back to us and say, this doesn't feel native, or this doesn't feel right. So this is something that I think we have had for a long time, and the users have been trained to know when something doesn't feel right. And so as developers, we need to keep that in mind as we start adding features. It's easy enough to build your simple, CRUD style app or your business information app. But if you want to push it even further and get that last 20% of finesse that that users expect, you need to keep the most attention there. Your actions need to be fast. Anytime you are changing things dynamically, that needs to happen very quickly. And any little bit of polish on top of that, it cannot slow down the performance. And so a great way to look at this is to look at the apps that are shipped by Apple. Apple ships really awesome apps. You can say what you want about the devices, the operating system, the company. All that aside, the apps that they built and the teams that build those apps do a great job. For instance, one that we're going to look at and has been a case study of mine for a long time is the native Apple Music Player app. So this is Apple Music. It does a lot of great things here. Obviously, it's playing music, it's streaming audio and everything, but the functionality of loading up songs, listing album art, showing what's playing, what's coming up next, that's all fairly simple to build. It's this rest of this stuff, right? We open up, we play, and we pause. We have this elevation effect happening with the card and the now playing artwork. We go and change a song. We have a different background color depending on what song's playing. And we're changing the layout and animating this as things pop into view. You might think that this is really easy. This is really, really hard stuff, especially with like the layout change and the background color and making sure that whatever it is we're doing it super performantly, and it's not going to impact our users' devices in a negative fashion. So let's try to look at this and break down how we can get these effects on the web by mimicking what Apple's doing. So we have three goals here. We want to know about animating the right things, how to handle layout changes and dynamic and unknown animations, and then handle the background changes in a nice fashion. For context, obviously, we are looking with Ionic, and I'm working with Angular for the most part. But Angular is not a requirement. You could be using Vue, you could be using React, what have you. The principles are still going to apply regardless of your text choice. Let's dive in. So looking at animating the right things and making sure that we are doing it performantly, we're really talking about that card effect. That sense of elevation and being able to essentially fake it with pixels is a nice win that you can add to your app to create a sense of depth in the UI. So for instance, here is the app again. Here's the effect. It's very subtle. It's not going to break the app if this doesn't work, but it adds that nice touch that makes users feel like this is a high quality app. So the scaling of the artwork is pretty simple, but then we have this shadow that's very, very subtle behind it. And that shadow is really what's going to drive the sense of elevation and create the illusion for us. If you can't tell from the screen recording, the shadow gets very, very small as the card is closer to the surface and as the song starts playing and the album artwork expands and gets larger, the shadow increases to push that sense of elevation. So I tried to do this at first, and I was like, let's go to Google, let's go to material design. They have a fantastic doc section all on elevation. We're gonna look at it, read it, break it down, take a look at how elevation works in designs and how we can add this to our app, copy some CSS, and we're good to go, right? Here we go. This is the very first effect, very first pass at this. I didn't focus on getting the card to actually scale. I want to make sure that the styles and the shadow was working. So what's happening here is that we have an animation that's just toggling to simulate the effect. We are going from one box shadow value to another using some keyframe animations just to see how that effect is going to simulate. And more or less, we got something pretty good. It's working. I should be able to ship this, right? No, I cannot ship this at all. Box shadows in particular are a terrible, terrible thing to use in your design for the reason that they are just so slow. They are going to be the biggest bottleneck in any design system and any website or web app. The way that a box shadow works is when the browser is parsing all the HTML and applying all the styles, when they get to a box shadow or something with a blur or an opacity change, they essentially have to calculate every single pixel as the blur either starts from the strongest point to the weakest point. So the spread of that opacity and that blur is going to require a pixel by pixel calculation to figure out, I am at this point, these are the shadows, this is the color, calculate what the color I should be showing here is. Very, very bad for performance. Trying to animate that's even worse because now you have that one operation and you're constantly pinging the browser to say, hey, at this step of the animation, I need to know what color this is. At this step of the animation, I need to know what color this is. If you're doing multiple mutations on that box shadow, your browser is constantly going to be working to figure out what colors should it be showing, and that's going to just be terrible for performance. Your CPU usage is going to spike, and it could negatively impact your device's battery. Your CPU is being spiked, you're using more system resources, your battery is going to drain quicker, and eventually, if we had enough time, we could drain an entire device's battery by just letting it play that shadow. Now, there is ways to actually prove this, and it's not just me saying it. We can use this paint flashing API. So this is inside of the DevTools, and everywhere we see red is where the browser is needing to repaint or recalculate the pixel colors for this UI. So even though we are animating that main and see it kind of growing and shrinking, those other affected areas are also going to need to be repainted. This is inside of Safari on my iPad. So it's not necessarily a great test. The iPad is actually a really capable device, but we have DevTools where we can test this inside of Chrome or Edge in this case as well. So let's just open up our DevTools over here, and we're going to open up the UI. And in fact, did I not save this? One moment. There we go. Okay, so we have the same effect happening inside the browser. If you can't see it throughout the screen share, don't worry. I promise it is there. And to prove that, we're going to come over to our tabs over here at the top inside of Chrome, and we have this rendering tab that we can look at. If you don't see that in your browser, you can click the plus icon, and you can come down to it, and it should be here in the list. But rendering is going to give us a way to see all of the different rendering aspects of our web page. So we could show layer borders for everything that has a layer, which is pretty trippy once you see the scaling effect. We can show all of the different frame rate stats, whether or not we're dipping below 60 frames per second. The one that we want to point out is this paint flashing section over here. So let's click that, and here we can see the actual UI effects of our box shadow. This is fairly, minimal. It's not going to be a huge impact, right? Well, this is a desktop. Let's go to simulate probably worst case scenario of a 6x slowdown. So we're going to go simulate 6x slowdown. Maybe it's a lower end mobile device. Maybe it's an old device that's like 2, 3, 4 years old. And then let's go to performance monitoring. I'm going to zoom this in real quick so that way you can see some of the numbers. And I want to point out all of the things happening here. Now, this is probably going to be a little suspicious. Because I have screen share going and I have Zoom running, these numbers are going to be a bit unrealistic. But at this point, we are spiking our CPU usage. And in real tests, when I've done this before without Zoom and slides running, I've gotten around 30% CPU usage. Again, this is not necessarily the most important thing that we should be looking at with everything running, but 30% is pretty average. The big pain point over here is the style recalculations. You can see in the timeline that we're seeing some very wide-ranging numbers. At most, we were getting about 120 style recalculations happening per second. So by doing this simple animation and the simple box shadow, we're having to recalculate our styles and repaint in the browser 120 times per second. Our CPU usage is skyrocketing, and it's not worth it to do this type of effect with box shadows. So let's go back to my editor, and I'm going to select all the styles that we use for this and just comment it out. We have another way that we can do this using something called pseudo elements. Should be fairly familiar for most developers. Let me bump that font size real quick. What we have, no, don't fail, editor. What we have is this after pseudo element that we can use, and we can recreate essentially a box shadow with this. So we just sent the content to nothing, width and height are 100%. Our background color is going to get the RGBA value of our box shadow originally. We'll do a border radius on it because why not? Blur is going to be 12 pixels. And then we're going to use Scale 3D to adjust the size. Now, the animation for this is using keyframe animations again, because it's just easy to emulate this. But all we're doing is instead of changing the actual filter, blur, in colors, all we're doing is just changing the transform property on that pseudo element. This is going to go from 0.9 and basically 000 across in the Translate 3D to 1.05. And then I was going to move it down like about 12 pixels. The actual values don't matter too much. They were just stuff that I messed around with to see what looked right. But using transforms, we're going to alleviate all of those issues with performance that we had before. So let's save this real quick and go back to the browser. Give it a minute to, where is that error? Nope, that's not it. There we go. All right, let's let this rebuild again. we're going to double check that we have everything going well. Go to the rendering. Paint flashing is looking good. Performance. Let's turn off the throttling so that way the browser actually will load. Everything's looking good. Here we see everything looking great, rendering, and now paint flashing is still on. We still have that paint flashing flag enabled, and we're still getting the animation of the pseudo element scaling up and changing its affected area. Again, if you can't see it in the screen sharing, let's go ahead and actually just make this color pretty obvious. There we go. So the box shadow is looking very, very obvious at this point. We are getting that effect across. Paint flashing is enabled. And if we go to the performance monitoring, or apologies, if we go to the performance and then click the 6x slowdown to really simulate what real world scenario would be like, the style recalcs are essentially 0. CPU usage, look how low that has gotten. This is not only flashy and fun, but it's very, very fast and effective. As a user, I can get this really nice effect inside my web app without crashing my whole device. And as a developer, the amount of work that I need to do to get this, maybe it's a little bit more, but I have more fine-grained control over the styles, and it's much more performant. So instead, window shopping, instead of having something like this, which is super, super, super bad, we have something like that, which is much faster, much better overall for our users. I had a recording in here just in case that wasn't going to work, but we'll skip that. And just to recap, we have our styles in here with the box shadow equivalent. This is the actual CSS I was using, which was terribly slow and bad for performance. And instead, we went with something like this, which arguably it's more code, but it's more maintainable and better to be performed this way. If you're using something like Angular, you can abstract this into a component and just include this into your design system. Vue, React, you can use something like styled components to get this same effect without having to duplicate the code all the time. So all in all, we have a shadow working. It's animating and adjusting in a very, very fast and performant way. We're happy. Let's go back to the next one. We've been able to animate our design. This is working great. So let's tackle the next thing. And that is dynamic and unknown animations, layout changes, things that can appear in the UI that we need to account for. So if we go back to the very, very first example that we had at the beginning, we had that layout change as we were going through and toggling essentially a queue list. So that queue list is going to appear from on the right-hand side. It's got a nice animation where it actually scales up and fades in. And then the main content, this player UI, just kind of animates off to the left a little bit. So this UI is actually relatively, I wouldn't say simple. It seems simple, but it is actually really confusing and hard to do in a way that makes sense. I tried to do this in the traditional way that I would normally animate things, and that is do one of them at a time and figure out how to compose it together. And I could get one, but I could not get the other one. As things were being added to the DOM and layouts were changing, my initial animation values would be incorrect, and I would have to go through and figure out how to adjust it. And I almost thought that this was not going to be possible on the web, and I almost gave up on it until I was reintroduced to the idea of flip animations. Now, flip is an acronym, stands for first, last, invert, and play. And it is a step on how, or is a process that describes how we can do animation and layout changes really simply. So the first step is to take a snapshot of our element. We want to know its position. This is using get client bounding rect, which is a terrible name. It's very confusing. But all it does is get us the X and Y, width and height, basically tells us where is this element in position on my screen. So we get that first snapshot. We then cause a layout shift or do whatever we need to get to the final point. This could be adding a class, doing some style changes, adding things to the DOM. We simply want to cause a layout shift that's going to get our initial element to be at its last position. And then we're going to get a snapshot of that again. So with the end and then the start values, we now can do some math to figure out, I'm here at the end, but I want to simulate like I started from the beginning. So what's the difference in my position? Am I from, we get the X and Y and maybe do some scaling effects as well. We can do some math to figure that out. And then we invert those, apply those values, and then our element appears to be at the very start of this setup. Now, with those values calculated, we can do some web animations and figure out, create an animation from this initial value to the end value, and then play the animation to simulate the effect that this transition was going to happen regardless. It's not a layout change and then we went back to it. No, it was just a natural part of this design's implementation. So let's see the code that we have in this. I'm not going to go into the real code that I already wrote, but I'm just going to break down how we're able to do this inside of a web app using the flip approach. So 47 lines of code, let's break it down. It seems very complicated, it's not. What we have here is this very first line of code where we get the two elements that we want to animate. This is going to be that main UI and then another bit of UI that is the queue list. From here, we want to go ahead and call getRec, which is just a nice and easier way to mold the data that comes back from get client bounding rect. And it's a way to avoid having to type get client bounding rect. It's very difficult to even type, let alone to say. So we get our position data, we return that, and then we cause a layout shift using, in this case, we're just toggling a class. Now, with that, when we go and get our final data, we have all the pieces that we need to figure out the difference. So we could start with something simple, like where we say the difference in the X and Y is just, we take the before and then the after and we subtract them. Or we can do some complex stuff where we say, hey, here is some more complicated data. Return us an object or return us something that's going to be a range of values. Basically, we have complete control over how the data that comes back from these get rec calls influences our animation in the future. So essentially, we have a difference in left to right, and then we have a difference in scaling and opacity. So let's create the queue animation first, because that to me seems like the most complex. We basically have our element. And in this case, we're using Ionic's animation API, mostly because it was something that was available to me and I want to try it out. No particular reason. You could use any animation library here. We can go ahead, we can say, animate the player queue, the thing that's going to appear on the right side. And we're going to start off with a scale transform where we say, take this from value, scale it to essentially 0 or 0.8, and then scale it to 1. So essentially scale it from this in-between value to the final value. And then we're going to add another from to that we can chain on top of that, where we'll animate the opacity, and we'll animate that from either 1 to 0 or 0 to 1. Doesn't really matter. Once that's done, we can push that on top of a parent animation chain and save it for later. The track animation is a little bit simpler because it's doing less. In this case, we really only need to use the transform, and we're going to essentially use the from variation because we don't really care where it's going to. We just need it to come from this one point. And this actually adds a nice little nuance where we have to actually use some before and after hooks to set some different styles to make sure that the anchoring for this animation is handled correctly. And then after all that animation is done, we can clear the transform origin, and then we can go ahead and push that to the parent chain. Now, putting this all together, this is what we get. The animation, it fades in. I didn't handle the fading out and scaling out, mostly as a limitation of time and effort on my part, but it's actually quite simple to do. But we still get the same effect, and it's really, really performant. Now, what's nice here is that because we're using flip style of animation, it doesn't matter what orientation that we're doing. We could have different animations for animating in a portrait mode or landscape mode, and all we really need to do is check if we are in animation, if we are in a portrait landscape, and add an extra element to the queue. In this case, the only difference here is that we're also animating the title to create the stack to horizontal effect. So everything else stays pretty much the same. So with that all together, the animation in total, and let's just look at it just to see what it is. Animation. See, we have our if portrait do something different. We have our get rect class, our function. We don't really need to worry about these too much. Everything else here is essentially 122 lines of animation with spaces, with some formatting. So it's not necessarily a good metric to look at, but the animation itself becomes much easier to understand and much easier to figure out as things are going through. So pretty simple, pretty easy to implement. So if you're doing stuff in your app that you need animations and you don't know how the layout is going to change, try out flip animations. You don't need to use Ionic's animation API. You can. It's actually really, really performant, but other animation APIs can be applied here as well. You could just use raw web animation API if that is something that you're interested in, or probably even better, GreenSock animation library has a flip plugin that you can apply if you're already using GreenSock, and it will automatically handle all of this for you without you having to figure out the math and the details. It even handles the situation where if an element is getting removed from the DOM or set to display none, it'll figure out how do we handle that animation and then applying either to display none or removing it from the DOM. It'll handle everything for you. It's really, really good. And I think it was open sourced about a month or two ago. So we can animate our elevation. We can animate the right things. Let's go into the last part. And that is this dynamic reactive background changes. The Apple Music API for this just will give you an album art, and then natively, I'm not sure how they do it, but they derive several colors to create this illusion. Whether this is just analyzing the image itself or they have a private API that they use to get this, I don't know, but we can create the same effect on the web. Now, this is not the first time I had done this. I had actually messed around with analyzing images and extracting colors from them before, and there's an existing library that can be used here to simplify the process. My main challenge is I want to make this fast and essentially lazy. I don't want to have to manage calling the color itself. I just want to be able to do it once and let it automatically update as the new images come in. So there's this really, really awesome library called Color Thief, where it'll just go ahead, analyze an image, and extract the dominant colors here. Note that the colors aren't 100% what you would think they are. It tries to do its best to average out everything. So what we have here is the plate with some celery, carrots, some fried stuff, and some sauce on it. And the plate is the dominant color according to Color Thief. It's what is accounting for all of the pixels in an average value. Now you could get just the dominant color, but Color Thief will also return a palette of different colors that are maybe here's the first primary color, the secondary, tertiary, fourth, fifth, and sixth, what have you. You can limit, I think you can, it's limited to 10 colors by default, but you can extract that even more, and you can you can increase or decrease the quality of how much you want to sample here. I think maximum quality is literally going to look at every single pixel and average that out, which could affect your colors. But they start off with, I believe, 25 as a quality. It's out of 0 to 100. But that's besides the point. We have our way to analyze images and get a color from it. Now, to make this fast and to make this easy, we're going to use a concept from Angular called directives, and we're going to use web workers. So the directive, if you're unfamiliar, essentially a way for us to attach functionality onto an existing element or component without having to provide our own template or provide any HTML. It's essentially a nice little way to add modifiers or macros to elements. With this, we can go ahead and we can observe a property and then react to that property and emit an event whenever we want to. And we're going to use web workers here. So let's dive into this. It's a little bit more involved, but don't worry too much. It's actually just composed of some pretty simple pieces. So this main piece that we want to look at is this ng on changes. This is a little call that gets a little method that just gets called every time a change happens to our component. So in this case, we are listening for when the source property on an image changes. We have a default icon that gets applied. So if this is the first change, we're just going to go ahead and go get the colors from that. If not, if it's a new change from a previous value, let's do quick little comparisons because sometimes the API that Apple uses can return different query params attached to the image URL. So like it'll start off with image.jpg q equals 1, and then for whatever reason, 5 seconds later, it'll add a q equals 2. I don't necessarily care about those query params. I just want the actual URL. So we compare that, we set the current property, and then we go ahead and get the palette for the image. Now, this get palette from URL is going to go and download that image, store it in a JavaScript image object, and then it's going to call this get palette method. So it'll go ahead, it'll do a color count for us, either 2 or 256. Quality is by default 10. But what it's doing here is actually going through and creating a canvas behind the scenes. Now this canvas is going to get the image data, it's going to plot that image data, and then it's going to get all of the pixels involved, the number of pixels, And then it's going to use this worker post message to post all of that data to a dedicated web worker. The web worker will be able to process all of this because it's really just doing math at the end of the day. It's going to process all of this off the main thread. Everything that's going to happen here is going to happen off thread. It's not going to block any UI changes. We could post multiple changes to this, and it's all just going to process pretty smoothly. When the worker is done processing all that data, we're going to come back up here and we're going to listen for that with this on message handler. On message is going to get some data. Once we have that data, we can remove the canvas because it's just nice to clean that up to keep the DOM pretty minimal. And then we're going to emit that data, which is going to contain an array with RGB values involved. So let's take a quick look at that. I have this in color from image directive. You can see our canvas is essentially just a simple little function that's going to return canvas elements. Here is the directive. Here is our get palette from URL. Our get palette where we call the worker. We just pass in all that data. The worker itself, probably the more complex stuff. Again, it's literally just going through and comparing all of the different values that get introduced here. And this is stuff I borrowed from Color Thief. All this math involved, which I was not wanting to do. When we get the data from that post message, we have the add event listener. We go ahead, we get the pixels and everything, and then we figure out the array of pixels, which is essentially a multi-dimensional array of arrays, where the first element in the parent array is an array of RGB values. It becomes very complicated once you start dealing with arrays and all this stuff. And then we just call quantize to figure out the difference. And then we get the palette from that. And then post message, we'll just send that data back. And then obviously, as we saw in the slides, the actual data from this just gets emitted from our UI. In the actual component where this gets consumed in this now playing artwork, is that the now playing artwork or is that the modal? Component, here we go. We have, I promise we have it, here we go. We use that event from the directive to call this method update color. Now it returns, like as I said, an array of arrays, and then we can go through and we can set some CSS variables on the component itself and just set the background colors using RGB values. So altogether, there's some moving parts here. This is probably the more complex out of all three examples, but in practice, when we actually look at how this works, this is the web version, the colors subtly change. It's more obvious on the very obvious colors, but there is no blocking in happening here. The song is playing, data is happening in the background. As we go to the next album art, it automatically updates and reflects the common colors inside of the album artwork. So all of this put together, we have an app that is just showing and loading data, playing songs, which is managed by the Apple's own library. The finessing part of here is going to push this app even further. And you can try it out now. This app is on Firebase hosting. You can go to startrack-ng.web.app. And let's actually, I have my device connected. Here we go. This is my actual iPad connected to everything. And this is music coming from Apple itself. So There we go. Let's go to the sleep sounds again. And let's go ahead and play the song. Open up the modal, and let's go to the next one. Background color changes. We still have that nice scale animation, and it becomes more noticeable as you are only doing it as you play and pause the music. We can come over to this bottom button and we can open up the player queue. This is its own scrolling list. And for fun, we have an animation happening on the player queue to show the updates happening when an item gets removed. So
Just a
all this
question.
together,
Mike,
yes.
is it accepted by Apple, the Apple Store? Because it's so good.
I don't know. I haven't actually tried it. I don't want to go through that process. I just wanted to do it as a web app, which is all this is. This is just available on Safari. But it gets a nice little effect. It's all working very smoothly, and users are happy with that because they have the functionality first and foremost, but they have the finesse there. They have the different animations and all the context changes that are showing them how the app is working, and it's fast, it's performant. It makes the app really, really stand out. So let's pause this for now and get back to the slides. Yeah, wrapping up, we can have nice things. I love building, your standard data-driven CRUD apps, but I like also having really fun apps that make me want to use them more. So we can have these nice things like animations, context changes for background colors. There's going to be a little bit smarter than your average developer and how we implement them, because they're going to be possible. They're just going to be a little bit of work, but you can add them and you can make your app really stand out and among the countless number of apps that are available in the store. So that's everything I have. If you have questions, I'd love to take them. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Any questions? I have one question personally. Next Friday, I have to go to a Flutter meetup. I'm going to give a talk about Ionic versus Flutter. Do you have any suggestions for me? Because I'm a little bit scared.
Good luck.
Ask them to go to a web app and just hit tab and see what happens. For instance, if we go here, if I want to really show off, I can just tab, hit enter. Let me actually. I'm terrible last minute kind of changes. I have all of the things showing up, but just ask them to go to a web app and say, hey, what happens if you hit tab on your keyboard? Will it go through all of the different album arts? Will it go through everything and be accessible by other people? If not a good idea.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
No problem. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay, thanks. We have a small break. At 8 o'clock, I will give a presentation about Appflow. Just stay around if you want. And I will send you the book via an URL. So thanks you very much. Okay, break.
Nice one. Mike is wat haar verloren.
Oh. Okay, I will tell something about Ionic Appflow. But first, small introduction. I'm a software developer. I'm very enthusiastic, sometimes too enthusiastic. Colleagues complain, and I like running. And this computer, maybe all the people recognize this computer. André?
Wel, dat is de VIC-20.
Exactly, the VIC-20. I still have it at home. But it was my first.
Calls of the keys.
Yeah, exactly. And it was my first programming language basic. And I just started programming at age of 10, 11. In 2015, I co-founded Dayclocks. Dayclocks is a company who sells special clocks for people with dementia. And that's also the main reason to using Ionic, because I was a developer. I want to have my application for iOS and for Android. So I started using Ionic. For the tablet, I started using Android, but also currently I'm migrating it also to Ionic because it's much easier to develop in HTML or in TypeScript and in React than in Android. A small introduction, especially for Simon about Ionic. Ionic is a framework with UI components you can use, and you can build applications in React and deploy it to Android or to iOS, but also to the desktop. Previously, they used Cordova, but currently. And also you can I forgot you can use Angular, React, or Vue.js to build your applications. And in the past, they used Cordova to make connect to your mobile features like your camera. But currently, it's Capacitor. You can have different plugins, camera push notifications. You can use Firebase, geolocation. So that means you can use your normal web application to convert it to a mobile application. So you can deploy it to iOS or to Android. Then Appflow. Appflow is a tool mainly to build and deploy your amazing apps. You can publish your app. You can do live updates. It means you can publish first time to the Play Store or Apple Store, and after that you can just make your own updates without the Play Store, App Store. So if you have, also you can have native builds, and you have different kinds of automations, but in this talk I want to address only live updates. So give a demo.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you're sharing your screen. Someone's asking if you can share your screen.
Sorry guys, you didn't miss every special thing, so I can. Okay. The live deployments, you can use it for your app updates or some content changes or A/B testing. For example, you want to test different kinds of buttons, so you can deploy the red button to one specific group and the blue button to another specific group. Of course, bug fixes, you don't have to go to the App Store again, just deploy it, your bug fixes, and test some beta features. A quick start. This is the main screen of Appflow. You can choose the application. I created a special app for this evening. This is only you have to do. Ionic deploy add your app ID, your channel name. You have different channels for example, production or test A, test B, or etc. And your update method in the background. Then it's updated automatically in the background, and if your app restarts, it's updated. Auto, then it will install during your application, and none you have to do it programmatically, just by yourself, in control by yourself. And you can deploy a live update, and you go to your commit new commits. Then you press start build. Then you can select what kind of update you want. You can select this is just these two are the native deployments, but this time you select that. And then you can do a web preview and a live update, and then you can select your channel. It builds your application. It's time for a demo. I will go to my editor. I created a Trivento app. I can show to you. It's just an app for your for Trivento, about your workplace, about the people who works over here. I can go to people. There are only two people now. Andre and Henk. And for this situation, I want to add one person. And we will later on, after the update, you will see it in my app. So I will make a change. I will add
You're the co-pilot. Nice man.
So I will commit.
And is that a Z shell plugin that I saw in your terminal, or is it something from VS Code? That pop-up that appeared in the terminal. You were typing git commit, and I saw some pop-up.
Oh. I will. Okay, finished. Push the change. Then I go to Ionic dashboard. You can see over here the application. I go to commits. You can see over here the commit. Oh. I have to go start build. I can select live update, production. And then I start build. And you have lots of options. You can also have automate things and signing certificates you can install. But only the live update is already very, very interesting.
Your repo connected from Ionic to, for example, Azure DevOps, or is it locally at Ionic framework?
No, you can just use GitLab, Git.
Yeah. Okay. Pretty fast.
Mm.
Judith installs elevator music.
Yeah. Maybe you can see.
There's some limitation to the live updates.
But it's also a paid service. And currently I have a limit for 10,000. Okay, 10,000 updates every month.
Yeah, okay, but not do some features or
No.
changes.
No. I only changes for your HTML, for your JavaScript. If you have plugins, capacitor plugin, then you need to build a native.
Okay.
Oh, it's now succeeded.
Chris asks if you can start builds from the code.
No, that's also possible, but you have to use the automate functionality. Yeah.
If you check into, for example, master, then it gives some automation that you commit in master, then it runs a build.
Yeah, it's using for I think Fastlane, and you have a lot of possibilities.
Yes, the question if you can run it by code changes or from your local environment, because I think there's also Appflow CLI, if I'm correct, or Ionic CLI. Not sure, but that's also possible.
Now I restarted the application. Now you can see, and Patrick is added.
Nice.
So that's. I think it's very nice and practical, especially if you have bug fixes or you don't have to wait one day or.
Free for.
Yeah. Okay, that was my talk. Then we have the revel. Yeah, you can do it. Yeah, of course. I stop sharing. I have to dress here's the jar.
Drum roll.
I just come around.
I have number 5, so I don't cheat.
Niet goed.
Who's number 6?
Oh yeah.
Yay!
No, you're number 9. I'm sorry, 9.
Okay.
Finally.
Sorry, Chris. Next time better.
Thank you. Thanks very
Okay.
much.
Now this is our meetup. Thanks for.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. I'm gonna be coming for a holiday. I'll be coming for a holiday soon.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
En gebruik je nu ook al